try to make the election about, well, who runs the country? Is it the unions or is it the elected government? And that argument survived about 3 days, because the public by that time were very cross, very cross.
Tories out! You're a dictator! God say you take the country down the river!
Heath, in asking the question, who rules Britain, was going to get the answer from huge numbers of people, not you, mate.
Wilson had a much keener nose for public opinion than Mr. Heath. Wilson was almost feline.
I believe that the voters recognise who it is that has encouraged the militants over the past 3 years. Mr. Heath has given the militants the charter they always dreamed of.
He was offering the public the option of not dealing with the trade union problem, really, and that was put off because the public wasn't yet ready to face it. They faced it with Margaret Thatcher. They weren't yet ready for that.
The result was extremely close.
For the first time since 1929, a British general election has failed to produce a clear result.
Wilson won most seats, though not an overall majority, but Heath won most votes.
Mr. Heath going back to number 10.
Heath stayed put in Downing Street and tried to do a deal with the Liberal Party and its leader, Jeremy Thorpe.
Heath made a rather flat-footed attempt to form the sort of coalition we've got now. He would say, and his supporters would say, he made a more principled attempt. He'd said to Jeremy Thorpe, there's a national emergency, we want you to support the emergency, but we can't buy you with seats in the cabinet. But that was really rather typical of Heath. A man of principle, I think, but nevertheless applying his principles in a rather flat-footed way. The coalition was never going to come about. I remember Jeremy Thorpe coming out of number 10 and saying to television, he won't give us anything. And that was Mr. Heath all over, I think.
The last day in number 10 was on the Monday, and we sat round the cabinet table, and the person who really expressed our feelings on that occasion was Margaret Thatcher, who was the one who expressed admiration for what Ted Heath had done as Prime Minister and for the way he had behaved towards colleagues, and how sad it was that it ended in that way. And that was Margaret Thatcher. Didn't always work out like that afterwards.
He was deeply depressed, and it was emotional for all of us, really, because there was a sense in which, because Heath had no close family of his own, the people at number 10 felt like an extended family, and that was coming to an end. So it was an emotional time.
I felt sad because I believed in 3.5 years we've achieved a very great deal, but we've left unfinished business.
At Buckingham Palace, Heath came out of one door, whilst Wilson went into another.
He went up to see the Queen and handed his resignation, which he did, and I had some rather unpleasant sherry with the Queen's secretary downstairs.
Howard Wilson and his wife Mary went in their little car. The rest of us in his personal team went in a separate big car, and we all drove to the palace.
And then eventually he came down, and we walked out to the door, and there was no car. Our car had gone with our driver, who we'd had for 4.5 years. I said, where the hell's the car gone? Oh, he's gone to pick up Mr. Wilson, they said.
Half an hour later he came out, and then there was an official number 10 car waiting, and he got in, and then I watched him get in, and I thought, he's Prime Minister.
Mr. Wilson, having kissed hands as Prime Minister, has returned from the palace to number 10 Downing Street.
We've got a job to do. We can only do that job as one people, and I'm going right in to start that job now.
And when we walked into number 10, we all went and had a look around, and Wilson was very intrigued by all the changes and the new wallpaper and all of this. The Harold turned to me and said, Ted's punched it up a bit.
Wilson immediately bought off the miners. He ordered a pay review, which gave them a massive increase. It was storing up trouble ahead, but for now, the nation had chosen peace and submission.
I, from 1 week writing speeches for Ted Heath about how important it was to resist the miners, found myself the next week writing speeches for Harold Wilson, saying all this had been a waste of time and the problem could be easily settled.
The public preferred a quiet life under Harold, and he didn't understand Ted Heath for what he felt was creating a lot of disorder and chaos. He wasn't a revolutionary and he wasn't very radical. Ted Heath was much more radical than Harold Wilson.
There is an actual, if not animosity, there is a real feeling between the two of you.
Well, I think in politics, you see, it's not a question of going about liking people or not. It's a question of dealing with people.
But do you like him?
Well, again, it's not a question of likes or dislikes.
But do you like him?
That'll have to remain to be seen, won't it?
The nature of the Prime Minister himself was very different under Wilson. In personal terms, he and I got along very well together, and I enjoyed him. He had small talk in a way that Ted Heath never had, and in that sense it was a much easier relationship. But you didn't have the same sense of confidence and trust that you had with Heath. You felt with Heath that you could always trust him. With Wilson you couldn't be quite sure what he would be up to.
By the Queen, a proclamation dissolving the present Parliament and declaring the calling of another.
In October 1974, Wilson called another election, the fourth between himself and Heath. Heath was drinking in the Last Chance saloon.
By the time we came to the autumn of 74, the message coming through to the MPs and people who canvassed on the streets was, you know, we've got to get rid of this man. The feeling that Ted Heath's time had come and gone.
Wilson won again. Only just, but it was enough to defeat Ted Heath for the third and what would be the final time. Heath's party did not forgive him. In February 1975, a surprise challenger, Margaret Thatcher, took him on in the Tory leadership contest.
Well, when the ballot for the leadership came today, I was up fulfilling a political engagement in the Midlands. And the train arrived back in London an hour and a half late, and I got to the House of Commons too late to vote, so I wasn't in a very strong position all round. And as I got to actually to the House of Commons, none other than Kenneth Clarke came running out of Westminster Hall saying, "She's won, she's won."
After 10 dramatic years, the Heath-Wilson duel was suddenly over.
Wilson at first looked pleased because he had seen off his opponent throughout much of his career. And then he suddenly looked down and he said, well, I'm not sure that's a good thing. He said to me, you know, Bernard, I've been studying him for decades. I've watched his every move. I think I know what he'll say in any situation. I know how to provoke him. I know how to respond to him. I know what he'll do. And now he's gone.
There was one final piece of unfinished business in the topsy-turvy course of Heath and Wilson: Europe. Wilson had opposed Heath's entry, saying the terms were wrong. In 1975, he renegotiated the terms. The changes were entirely superficial, but allowed Wilson to recommend that the country vote in a referendum to stay in. Heath, from the back benches, was at the forefront of the Yes campaign.
Is Britain stronger inside Europe? Yes!
Wilson, ever fearful of splits in his party, kept a low profile. In the 1975 referendum, the British people voted overwhelmingly to stay in Europe.
Well, I'm delighted with the result. I've worked for this for 25 years. I was the Prime Minister who led...
Is over.
Every Democrat will accept the result. You and all.
It was the outcome both Heath, publicly and vociferously, and Wilson, privately and furtively, had wanted. But it had been a curious double act to get there. Wilson had always said to those close to him he'd do 2 more years and retire at 60. Fatigue and mental decline were beginning to show.
I left in April 75 and I came back in December 75 for some function. I'd never met a man so absolutely tired and exhausted. It was like a piece of elastic where all the rubber's gone. And I now think that the signs of his eventual mental decline were beginning to show.
On the 16th of March 1976, just over a year after Heath had been ditched by the Conservative Party, Harold Wilson resigned as Prime Minister and slowly slipped out of British politics. Heath set up home in Salisbury, but remained active in the Commons for the next 25 years.
When they both got old, Ted was really quite kind, and when Wilson had lost his marbles, he would ask Wilson and his wife Mary down to Salisbury for Sunday lunch and that kind of thing. And after Wilson died, he'd ask Mary on her own. And I think he got on quite well with Mary Wilson. That wasn't the problem. The problem was Harold. They were chalk and cheese.
Lord Harold Wilson died on the 24th of May 1995, aged 79. Sir Edward Heath 10 years later, on the 17th of July 2005, aged 89. Their duel now seems another era. Yet the problems they faced are oddly familiar. Britain's identity within Europe is still debated. Trade unions are gearing up against a Conservative-led government. The economy is fragile. The shadow of Heath and Wilson hangs over us. But as for the two men themselves, was there a winner?
Harold Wilson retired at a time he chose, under no particular pressure to do so, while still in office. Ted Heath was first defeated in an election and then hounded from the leadership of the party. So, in those terms, Wilson won. Looked at another way, I'm not quite so sure. Ted Heath had a passionate crusade, an ideal in which he believed Britain in Europe, in which he succeeded. And his success lasted after he had gone. Harold Wilson had no such ambition, no such crusade. His only concentration was on keeping the party united, which he did very successfully, but which was not a noble cause in the sense that Heath had had. So perhaps Heath won after all.
Chalk and cheese, we're as different as chalk and cheese.
And our Justice Night continues here on BBC4 this evening with The Good Life, a justice lecture from Harvard University's Michael Sandel at 2 o'clock. Next this evening, though, over to the Legend series for Herb Alpert, Tijuana Brass and other delights.
Me and you saying, how'd you do? Maybe it was